Auburn University. He is a Virginia Humanities Scholar by the National Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society and Virginia Humanities Council, and recipient of the American Psychological Association Wilbur McKeechee Teaching Excellence Award. Dr. Bub teaches joint classes at the junior high and high school on researching local African American history and cemetery preservation. Dr. Robert Love also serves as a part of the pastoral staff at Ebenezer Baptist Church and is an Alabama Army National Guard chaplain. At the request of his late grandfather, Dr. Bub spent the last decade documenting his enslaved ancestors in Texas. An original son of Brenham, his ancestors were brought to Washington County as enslaved laborers by the old 300. His ancestors likely did their part to clear the land, plant the crops, cut the roads, and build the buildings that made Brenham. His ancestors' stories are an integral part of Dr. Bub's identity. Please welcome Dr. Bub.
Slide advance over here.
Starting from stop right. If necessary to report any crashes or hazards to skill on site.
I hope there's no hazards in this conversation. Good evening. Good evening. I think that you can hear me just fine. I just want to say how grateful I am that Reverend Wells asked me to come here and speak this evening. It's quite humbling to be here in the land of my ancestors. And to be able to tell you the story of my two-time great-grandmother, Louisa Mangrum-Yoos. I know the title of the presentation on the announcement was Camptown Cemetery, but I don't have the historical background of the cemetery. I'll leave that to Tina Henderson and Cheryl Rivera and Charles Swenson. They know that history very well, but I can definitely tell you a little bit about my ancestors who are buried there in the cemetery. My three-time great-grandmother Caroline is buried there. My two-time great-grandmother Louisa, who we'll talk about today, is buried there. And my great-uncle John Hill is buried there as well. And I'm sure there's other family members that I don't know about that are buried there. None of them have a marker in the cemetery. And that's quite common when it comes to historic African American Black cemeteries, especially at that time period. You're not going to have headstones there. A lot of cases will be depressions, will be fieldstones, but you're not going to see necessarily headstones. You don't really see headstones in African American Black cemeteries until about 1920, when there was burial insurance that allowed for the proper burial of our ancestors. So it's very rare to see headstones. So again, I'm grateful to be here to tell you a bit about this story. And so Louisa Mangrum-Yoos, a well-to-do woman of Brenham, you see that's in quotation that came from an article in the Galveston News. And again, like I said, it's a Camptown story because she lived here, she buried here, she overran around the cemetery. That's why I'm honored and privileged talking about her today. With that, I do want to dedicate my talk to my grandfather. He's the one that got me started with this. So my grandfather's there on the left-hand side. Grandpa Lake, his name is actually James Harris. His mother was Lily, my great grandmother, and then Louisa, who we're going to talk about. I have a question mark there because I don't have a picture. And I wish I did. But we're going to talk about her. And this all started with my grandfather. So I'm the first in my family to be accepted to a university. And when my grandfather found out, he was incredibly proud. And he thought that maybe I was smart enough to figure out a mystery. And so the mystery was, who was his grandmother? He knew everything about his father's side. He knew very little about his mother's side because his mother didn't talk about her. And she passed away before he could ask questions about it. And his grandmother passed away, Louisa passed away before he was, so he knew very, very little about her. In fact, when he asked me to do this, he told me what he knew, and what he knew was that she was a poor, uneducated Black woman from Louisiana who was a housekeeper for old Mangrum-Yoos, right? And that her name was Man something, and he didn't know. Turns out that she wasn't from Louisiana, she was from here in Texas, but I think he confused Louisa with Louisiana or somewhere along the line, got confused and thought she was from Louisiana, or maybe Louisiana was involved too, not entirely sure. But that's what he knew, and very, very little, and there's a reason for that. And I hope to get to that today in a presentation of why he knew so little. Now, when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about some heavy topics, right? I think there's no way to talk about African American Black history without talking about some of those heavy topics. Right, I'll do my best to keep my composure, right? Because this is family, right? And it means a lot. And a lot to my grandfather. It means a lot to me because I've been doing this for the last 12 years. Researching this particular story, just mystery. So let's get into it. So let's get a little bit of the setting here. And you know, I'm gonna do my best to keep it within 30 minutes, but I might go over a little bit. I apologize for that, but it's hard to contain for life in 30 minutes. It really is. And so just give a little bit of a setting. So in 1808, the transatlantic slave trade ends, right? It's outlawed in America. So that means that when it comes to enslaved people, that there are no more coming from Africa. It means that now whatever enslaved labor that is needed has to be from within the United States. Not that there wasn't breeding programs before 1808, but after 1808, that was the primary resource of perpetuating more enslavement. Right? I think that's important to my family's story as well. And so we see the surge in breeding programs. That was the only way that you perpetuated enslaved people, that enslaved labor that needed, especially in the South. And so this is a deed record. I actually came across this deed record this trip, right? I finally found it. After 12 years searching for this deed record, I finally found it. And this was the deed record for my 3-time great grandmother, Caroline. So Louisa, who we're talking about today, is mother. And in this particular deed record, she is purchased by one of the original freedom. And I'm just going to refer to him like that. I'm not going to necessarily say his name. It's not hard to find out. In fact, if you look hard enough under, you can see it up there, but this isn't his story. Right? He has his actions. Right? He is well known in Texas. Right? I don't need him hijacking my ancestors' story. Right? And so I'll just leave it at that. He was one of the original 300. If you really want to know, I'll tell you that. But he purchases my 3-time great grandmother in 1841. He purchased her away from her husband. Now, technically, you couldn't be married as a enslaved person, but her partner. He purchased her away from him, purchased her along with 3 of her children for $700. So it's how you start to put a price on an individual person. But here is Caroline, and then she has a son named Sam, a daughter named Jane. I actually did not know about Sam until this trip. That's a new name. I did not know that was an ancestor of mine. Jane, and then an infant about 8 months old. None of those were Louisa. We'll get to that here in a second. So this is an 1850 slave schedule, and in here you have the enslaver, and then you have those that enslaved. Right? Now there's no names. Because that wasn't important to the census people at that time. They just needed to know how many enslaved people there were. And so all we're given is ages, the sex, and then the color. And in color, you either see a B for black, or you'll see an M for mixed, also called mulatto, right? Mixed. And if you look at this particular record, I was able to piece together most of who these individuals are in my family. And so here's Caroline at 35 years old. Here's Sam at 18. And Jane, remember from the deed record we just looked at. And then the infant who I don't know who that is. And this is where the enslaver that we have here in this particular record purchases them. And then you see 4 additional children: the infant, Louisa, who we're talking about today, Julia, and John, who was born in 1851. And you'll notice that all of them are mixed. When it comes to these children and who their father is, there are 3 different enslavers represented in this document. So again, reading wasn't just between enslaved people, it was also between enslavers. Like, a lot of you know that already. The slave rate was common. All you have to do is look at the 1850 and 1860 slave schedules, and you'll see just how common it is at all the mixed race. So I put on the side here just to kind of keep us on track here. So Louisa is my 2 times great grandmother, Caroline my 3 times great grandmother, Lillian is my great grandmother, who in the summer times we would go up and visit in Quincy, California. She passed away when I was 12. And so I have a vague recollection of her. And then my grandfather, James, just so that, right? So just so that you can keep an eye out, just what that family looks like. We can always follow the tax trail as well. Now, there's no names in tax records, but because enslaved people are considered property, that means there's a tax record. Right? You have to pay taxes, right? And so if you follow the record, you'll notice that this particular enslaver is decreasing the number of slaves periodically from year to year. Eventually, right, he sells what's left of the family in 1855. And the reason why you see this decrease one at a time is that the female enslaved people, my ancestors, are coming of age, which means that they were which he would then sell. Okay, all part of this program. Okay, and then in 1859, his wife passes away, so he ends up selling the remainder of the family. So at this point, he's selling Caroline, he's selling my great grandmother Louisa, she's selling Julia, he's selling John. Right? That's where you see this decrease from 5. I tried to look at these records, but unfortunately, these records were on fire, and so I don't know who he sold. All right, but then, as you all know, right, we're getting past the heavy stuff, right? Trying to get something a little more positive here. Juneteenth comes around, June 19th, 1865, right? And Louisa is free. She's about 18, so somewhere between 17 and 19 years old. Here in Brenham, right here in Washington County in Brenham. And she does get reunited with her family. And it's because they choose to go by the name of the enslaver through which they were all together with last. Right? They didn't choose the name of the enslaver that owned it when they were free. They chose the enslaver who they were all together. And they did that because if you're trying to reunite with your family, you need to know where you left it. And if you do it by the name of the enslaver, the last one you were all together, they would find each other. Again, we find them in the 1870 census here in Brenham. They're living next to each other in Camptown, where they're reunited. Now, I don't have time to get into this, but we're all familiar with General Order number 3. We read this every Juneteenth, especially this paragraph. We don't read the next paragraph that follows it. The next paragraph is the paragraph that keeps our enslaved ancestors on the land of which they were from, and becomes sharecropping. It becomes another form of enslavement. Right, where now the whole purpose of the institution of sharecropping was to keep people impoverished and on the land to work. And so when you think about that means the day after emancipation, when you woke up that morning, it'll look a lot like the day. You had the same land with the same people who enslaved you before, who abused you before, not only physically, but exploited you in other ways, right? You're not on you're on that same land. And that's the second part of that order that we don't talk about. We focus on the positive, which is good. I think we should focus on the positive. But we forget about that second. Sorry. Getting a little emotional. Okay. All right. So that's kind of the background, right? So let's talk a little about Louisa after emancipation. And so she gets married, right? She has an opportunity to be legally married, and so she married a freedman by the name of Smith Man. That's where the Mangrum name comes from. And he's a field laborer. That's going to be important later to their success because they have different skill sets. And those 2 different skill sets make them very, very prosperous. Now, Louisa, obviously, as an enslaved person, did not know how to read and write. But when we look at the record and the census record, we see that gradually she's learning to read and write. In one census record, she now knows how to read. The next one, she knows how to write. And so she's teaching herself how to read, which is going to be really important to what she does. And throughout her life, she showed that she values education beyond everything else. All the children that she raised, all received an education. And received extra education, which I'll talk about hopefully a little bit. Okay, but she buys the first property shortly after being married, and what's important here is that she keeps it in her name, right? Texas and California were the only two states in the United States that allowed a wife to own property in her own name, separately from her husband. And all the other states, once you were married, it became basically the husband's. But she knew that, and she was smart. So guess where she bought property? Texas. Yeah, okay. He's keeping this in her name. You're gonna see that a little bit later. You're gonna see who's wearing the pants in this relationship. And about this time, she's about 22 years old, right? And here, here's Mount Rochester Baptist Church, it's lot 17. She buys the lot directly across the street. Her high would end up being, cemetery is right here. So just kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at. So she buys that first piece of property. Before you know it, she is managing property. And every couple of years, she's buying more property, right? And so her mother passes away in 1872 or 1874. I'm sorry. And so that's Caroline, right? And Caroline herself had bought property. She's bought 3 lots of Gays Addition, what we were just talking about. Over here, she actually bought lots 5, 6, and 7 right there in Camptown. And so Louisa ends up inheriting those 2 particular lots because she pays off all of her mother's debts. So she's being very successful at this time, that she can not only afford what she has, but she can figure out the debts of her mother. And because of that, her sister Julia and her brother John give their portion of the inheritance to her for the fact that she paid off all the debts. So she gave all that lot. Eventually, across her life, she would own lots 1 through 7. 18 and 20 of Gays Addition. She would own a lot in the Randall Addition. She would own a house on East Alamo, was now East Alamo. She owned an event hall on the corner of Garrett and Kerr. 100 acres on Nails Creek, 100 acres on Kendall Creek, 100 acres in Miller Lake, had to look, sorry. And 12.5 acres on James Walker Lake on the other side of the cemetery, and 3 acres next to the cemetery north of the railroad track. I know that's a lot of words, right? So let's make a picture, right? Pictures are easier. That's what it looks like, right? So she owns here the cemetery, Camptown Cemetery. She owns the property to the left, which eventually becomes Baker High School. She owns the property up here. She owns property on the other side of the cemetery. 100 acres, 15 miles that way. 100 acres, 20 miles that way. 100 acres, 2 miles. Very successful individual. I wonder how she got to know about property management, right? It obviously was a brilliant individual. I sometimes wonder, as someone who is of mixed race, when she was enslaved, she usually meant that she would be the house. The house, maybe she was just being connected. I don't know, right? I don't know. But she obviously is brilliant. We can get a close up. This is a sandboard map. So these are available. They're fire maps, right, for fire insurance purposes. And so we can see again here is Mount Rochester Baptist Church. And this is what's called the home house. That was her dwelling. All the other property she rented or mortgaged out, right, to bring in income. But this is the one that she lived in. You can see from the map itself, just by adding the legend, that it's about 1,000 square feet. It's single story, has front and back porches, has an outbuilding like a carriage garage. So you can get an idea of what the house looked like. It's kind of neat, right? But also that Smith Mangrum, he was a field laborer, right? And they owned those 100 acres out there. And so when we look at the agricultural schedule, we can get an idea of what life was like on one of the farms, one of those 100 acres. You can see here they have 15 improved acres. Obviously, a house was on one of those acres, and they're growing corn, they're growing cotton. They have 6 pigs, 10 chickens, 2 working cows. They're making about $75 a year in production on this one farm, right? They have 2 others on this one right here. And so Louisa's skill with managing property and Smith's skill in the field is bringing them in, quote unquote. Okay, and so, and I know I'm moving pretty quickly, because like I said, I could spend 3 hours on this, and I don't got the time. You don't got that time either. So, but let's talk about some of the notable sales here. So one of the things that she does, what I thought was kind of interesting, I don't know if this is common or not, I guess I gotta look at more deed records, but she would mortgage her property out. And if the landowner that mortgaged the property wasn't able to pay, she didn't force them to pay, she didn't sue them, she just forgave them of the loan. We took the property back and redid it with someone else. When you think about that, that is a low risk way of owning property if you're in camping. Right? You can have opportunity to own property. If it doesn't work out, if you don't have the money, then you're not really out. Right? Good job. So I found that quite admirable, I think. I don't know if that's common practice or not. I guess that makes sense. I gotta look at some deed records. But I did notice it with her deed records because there was 2 times where she forgave and some mortgages. So they took property back and forth out. She did sell 2 of her lots, lots 6 and 7, and gave addition to the so-called mysterious 10. This is not her, by the way. This is Denny Thompson. But Denny Thompson, we got this image of what the output of the mysterious 10 looked like, right? It was a benevolent society that was there to help those who were sick, those who were poor, help in the case of burials. And so as you can imagine, being in Gays Addition right across from the cemetery was a prime location for this particular society. So she sold a couple lots too. In 1884, she sold 33 acres or 2.85 acres to the city for East End School, which would then eventually become high school. And I mentioned before that she valued education. It doesn't surprise me at all. With college education, she provides with her children. And then this last one, I wish I had 30 minutes to talk about this one, but I'll give you just like a quick rundown. So we talked about she owns property in her name, right? So her husband tried to sell her property. Yeah, Smith, he sells this 12.5 acres on the other side of the cemetery to his brother, Wilson Mangrum. And that did not please Louisa. So she sued her brother-in-law and got the property back. Yeah, you did not sell my property, it's my property. So she did get that, she got that one. Yeah, I can imagine the tension in the household. Not one there. She was a mother, I mentioned that before. She has 3 children. She has John, by the way, Smith Mangrum here in Brenham. She has another 2, Frederick and Lillian, by a German immigrant, Mangrum-Yoos in California. We'll get to California in a little bit. That is my 2-time great-grandfather, Mangrum-Yoos. I think the important thing to note here is that she was married to both of them at the same time. She would go back and forth every 2 years, managing her properties, and having these 2 households, managing these 2 households at the same time. There's an affidavit here in the Washington County Courthouse telling her that during this time that she's in all ways married to Smith Mangrum, always married, right? And so you know what they're trying to get at there, like he's saying that she's married, well, knowing she's married also. Which is illegal, also illegal in California because interracial marriage was not. But she got away with it because she said she was Mexican, she said she was Peruvian when she needed to be. With America, when she needed to be. And so there's a few documents where she says she needs to. She is because if you're Hispanic, the interracial wasn't applied. You don't apply for those of African descent. Or Chinese, sorry, yeah, Chinese descent. Yeah. So yeah, so she legally married, Mangrum-Yoos. Remember my grandfather said she was a housekeeper for old man Yoos? She wasn't a housekeeper. My great grandmother Lillian, she legally married my great grandfather. My grandfather legally married my grandfather. So we didn't find out that law. Yes. My family. Let's see, she raised several nieces and nephews, Rebecca Less, Harrison Presley, and Earl Jones. So not only her children, but family members' children, they're as successful as you are, you're taking in family members as well, caring for them. And she adopted a child by the name of Mary Vogel, which is an interesting story that I'll hopefully get to here in a second. Oh my goodness, is it already like 6:50?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I need to move a little quicker, I'm sorry. I'm, like I said, I can talk all day about this. All right. Just some quick significant events, here in Brenham. And then, I'll go very quickly through what happened in California, because I want to focus here. But in 1879, Louisa harbors a woman who is being abused by her husband. And she stands in between the husband and the abused woman, and she almost loses her life. She's almost shot by the husband. She moves, and she says in her testimony, which is wonderful, I actually get to see her words, her testimony, in quotations. So, if I had time, I'd read through it, where she says she moved out of the way just in time, and the shot from the shotgun and then involved. So she testified at the trial of that individual. Those were her words, which is amazing that we have some words of our ancestors. Moving. In 1883, a well cleaner almost dies on her property because she treats the property for ants and the fumes accumulate at the bottom of the well. But Wiley Hubert ends up going down the well and rescuing the individual. I won't go too much into that for time. But in 1886, the adopted child Mary is kidnapped by her biological mother. And so this is at 14, so this is 12 years later after she adopted Mary. And it ends up becoming a legal battle in Galveston. And I won't go too much into it just because of time, but the ultimate outcome is that Mary accuses Louisa of giving her away, right? And so she wants to go back to her biological. And it's just another accusation, which I can spend 30 minutes on this court case. Do I think that Louisa took a switch to her children? Probably, right? I can see her being very strict, very disciplined as an individual. I expect that she was probably very much disciplined with children. And getting a switch at this time isn't exactly uncommon either. So, that there may be some truth there. But anyway, the judge says the child will level 14, she can choose whether she wants to go. So she chooses to go with her biological mother. And 6 months after that, her biological mother is arrested for adultery, which that is just a code for prostitution. So we don't know what happens to Mary after that. It's an interesting case, and like I said, I could go for 30 minutes on this particular case because there's some amazing documents in there and some twists and turns. But I don't know if I have time to do that. So you can ask me afterwards if you want. So in 1889, Louisa visits California for a couple of months. She likes what she sees there, and so she starts trying to buy some property out there. I'll go pretty quickly through what happens in Oakland. She ends up buying a lodge in downtown Oakland. This is where she meets Frederick Hughes, the German immigrant. He's a butcher. She's one of the first people to live at her lodge. And like I said, they were legally married. We talked about validity. We learned a little bit more about Louisa and how she cares for other individuals. She buys an Oakland pioneer, David McNay. He's on the street in Oakland. She brings her in to her lodge and at her own expense cares for him until he dies 6 months later. Right? So she's caring for people. She's bringing them in to her house to her dwelling. At her lodge also is General Charles Kelly. He's the general of the Industrial Army. He's an advocate for workers' rights. He does a march on Washington. The great American author Jack London is prowling around with him at this time, documenting his trip to Washington, which means Louisa knew the great author Jack London before he was that great American author, right? He's just getting on his feet. I think it's a fascinating story. Another story I could spend 30 minutes on, but we won't go into that today. In 1886, Gustav Ruse, he is a rail car inventor. He goes missing. He's living at the lodge. He disappeared. He goes away with two gentlemen. He never comes back. All along to stay there. But you get kind of the idea of the individuals that are staying down the lodge. In 1897, she is a character witness for Frank Nolan, who is a mob boss. And Frank Nolan, well, the mob itself, bought all the elections. They had the police in their pockets. Jack London pens that they were ballot box stuffers and murderers, and the majority of their crimes were never reported. Right? So not good people. And so he does get arrested, Frank Nolan gets arrested, and Louisa is asked to be a character witness for him. And through her testimony, he again escapes jail. Um, so things get complicated when you're in a big city, I guess, right? I think that probably shook her up a little bit because shortly after she sells her lodge, and she becomes part of the very first social settlement on the West Coast. And so again, I can spend time talking about the social settlement as well. But I think it goes along with the character. The social settlement was there to help build skills for individuals and they become workers in the workforce. It doesn't surprise me given that General Charles Kelly was in her lodge, very much influenced, very much progressive, and so that doesn't surprise me at all. But she lived there for a couple of years. In the meantime, Fred Hughes is up in Fairplay, and he's homesteading 160 acres and building a house. And as soon as he's done, they move from Oakland to Fairplay, California, up in the mountains. So now he has for 300 plus acres here and another almost 200 acres there, right? And so she's being quite successful. People want to look roughly where that is. You can see that out there. I did go up there and visit. This is a picture of that property during the summertime. Very hilly, very dry. But that's kind of the Okay, so in 1906, Fred Hughes passes away. Dies of pneumonia. As you see there at the bottom, he leaves a wife, which is Louisa, and 2 children, Lillian and Fred. And then 2 years later, Smith Mangrum passes away here in Brenham. So she returns to Brenham with Lillian to claim his, his property because he owned the Rand lot. So she's going to come up here and pick it up to the lot. And it says return to Brenham here, but realize between 1890 and 1908, she is going back and forth every couple of years. So I say return to Brenham here, but it's not like it's the first time in 10 years. She's been going back every couple of years, managing property in both places. This just happens to be the last time, or this time that when she goes back. And so this is a picture that Deacon Eddie Harrison provided me. And this particular picture, this was taken around 1909, so we know that we're here from 1908 to 1912. And this is who I believe is Lillian, Louisa's daughter, here about the Missionary Baptist Church. You can see that she's very light reflected, as see in her picture, very light reflected here at the church. I should point this out. I'll make this really quick. So something I find that interesting is when my great grandmother talks about her time here in Brenham, she says that Louisa never let her out of the house. Anytime a boy called on her, she would shoot them away. So she was actually very upset at Louisa for not allowing her to date. And they returned to California in 1912, where she votes, right? Women were allowed the first time to vote in California in 1912. That's why she's there. And she votes in that very first election. She's back to California. Okay, so I'll move a little quick here, but you notice it says the bite and the curse. This is where, in my family, where we stop talking about our history. Okay? And so Louisa, again, every couple of years going back to Brenham, she goes back. And around 1918, she returns to California in 1921. While she's gone, her son gets married, moves to Oakland, and her daughter, my great grandmother, gets married and is living in the house. At this point, she has a child, a small child, a couple months old. And Lillian tells Louisa that she's going to go to Quincy, right? And Louisa doesn't want her to go. Right? And she tells her, if you leave, God will curse you. Not the family story. Right, and my great grandmother truly believed that she was cursed. No one really knows what that conversation was, what it was about, what that argument was about, but I think I have a pretty good idea. Because when Lillian goes to Quincy, she passes herself as a wife and she raises her children to be white. I'm pretty sure that conversation was, I'm leaving to go to Quincy and I put this path behind me with ancestry. I think that really upset Lisa, because her connection here to the Black community was something that incredibly important to her. For have her daughter turn back, I think is what would have made her say something like, "You do this, you deny who you are." Right? On their way to Quincy, he lost their life savings, accidentally left it in the restaurant, $11,000. When she got to Quincy, one of her children was stillborn. She attributes that all to this curse. Okay, so in 1922, Louisa leaves California for Brenham for the last time. She comes to Brenham, I'm wrapping up, I know I'm like a minute over right now. So we'll talk a little bit about her last day. She comes back to Brenham, she lives with her brother, John Little, in Camptown, where she still owns a bit of property. And then in October 14th, in 1926, her brother can no longer take care of her. So she's committed to the Russ State Hospital because she has dementia. And that's where she's going to spend her last 4 months of life in the hospital. She has a stroke on January 4th, passes away. And if you look at the death record, she's brought back to Brenham to be buried. And but most likely Camptown Cemetery, because that's where she owned all the property, and it was the oldest Black cemetery. So I'm pretty sure that she is there. And I know John Hill is there, her brother, and I'm pretty sure her mother is there also. We do find her will because she didn't own property. She left everything that she had to her niece, Hattie Gibbons. In her will, she requests that she gets a Christian-like burial suitable to my conditions and station in life, right? And that my grave be marked in suitable manner. If we go out to Camptown Cemetery, there is no marker for it. So either it was there and it no longer is, maybe it got buried under some of the erosion, maybe it was never replaced, maybe it was vandalized, we don't know. So my daughter for her youth project raised $10,000 for the memorial. And so we'll get that in the next few years. In the memorial bench to put out there at the cemetery. Just so that we can meet this desire. This is just a picture of the Russ State Hospital at that time. Not much to say here, but just that's what it looked like. Sometimes they look for documents of your family history. It's nice to find pictures, right? Which is a good idea of what life was. So let me kind of wrap this up. So you learned a lot about my two-time great grandmother. Like I said, there's several stories I could get into, spend more time on. But you got the very, the gist of what her life was like. And I just remember this is what my grandfather knew. Right? This is all he knew about such an amazing individual, lived an amazing life. And again, because of that divide between his mother and his uncle. But she wasn't poor. She didn't have a formal education, but she taught herself how to read and write. She valued education. She made sure that my great grandmother had every chance to complete the 8th grade. She sent her to 8th grade 3 times, right? Once in California, once here in Brenham, and she even paid for a boarding school in Sacramento to get her to get the 8th grade. You learn from the adoption records that for Mary Vogel, that not only she got an education, but she got extra. She got lessons in art, in music, in painting, and Louisa's own words said, "I prepared this child to be successful in high society." She wanted every opportunity for her children, whether adopted, nieces or nephews, biological, and every opportunity in life. She could, like I said, value education. My grandfather is a man of few words. And so when he asked me to do this, he always said, "Well, Robert, are you doing your family history?" It wasn't a question, that was a statement. Right? It sounds like a question. And I remember before he died in 2006. But in 2015, I went to visit him. We were at the park, and he said, "Well, Robert, come with me. I want to go down and pick some blackberries on my creek." And I knew that means he wanted to say something. He's a few words. So we go down there and he's pointing at blackberries like, "Give me that one, give me that one, give me that one." "Robert, I give you a sour." You told me which one. And then he said, this is all he said, was, "Well, Robert, you're doing a great job with your family history." We're going to say that the man of few words, taking a side. So very persuasive. Now, He doesn't know everything I've covered since his passing, right? But he knew enough that he was grateful to actually go. Like Reverend Harris said, Reverend Harris was who he was, but he didn't know. He didn't know that aspect of who he was on his mother's side. These guys went to that before they passed away. Grateful that I was able to do that. I think that concludes my presentation for tonight. I'm like 7 minutes over. I appreciate you hanging out here with me. Hope it was educational. Hope it was a little bit entertaining as well. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your attention. You're looking great with being here. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please give it up again for the. If you have any questions or like to take pictures with Dr. Well, please stay after. The Black Cat Street Club students, please, as well stay for pictures. Did y'all